Hey guys, this is Nathan for ProPokemon.com, and today I've got a Dark Explorer set review. So the set's out officially on the 9th of May in time for Battle Roads, Nationals and the World Championships, but pre-releases started last weekend. So let's get straight into it and see what my top cards are from this set. So first up we've got Heatmore. Now this has been pretty talked about because it's one of the main cards which could give Durant a hard time. Hot Lick only has a base damage of 10, but if the opposing defending Pokemon is a Durant, it does 50 extra damage. Now if you take into account Durant's weak to fire, that's a huge 120 damage for 1 energy. Thanks to it only needing a colourless energy, you can put it into pretty much any deck, and even if they do use any Loss Remover or Crushing Hammer, you still only have to attach energy next turn to use it again. We'll have to see how popular this is because it might turn out that decks have a good Durant matchup anyway and don't need it. With the new Dark decks, they'll have things like Dark Patch to help get Dark Energy back from the discard, and Darkrai EX to give them free retreat, so it looks like they'll have a pretty easy time with Durant anyway. But if your deck doesn't, then this is a great card to fit in and give a much better shot against it. Next up's Empoleon, which might look pretty familiar. That's because its attack command, is just like Jumpluff from Heart Gold Soul Silver. They both do 10 damage for each Pokemon on the field with both you and your opponent. So provided you can fill up your bench and the opponent's got to have at least one active Pokemon, then that's 70 damage, which along with Pokemon catchers can take a lot of cheap prizes. This also puts your opponent in a dilemma. Do they try and not allow Empoleon to do much damage by not having many Pokemon on their field, but then hinder their setup in the process? Or do they fill up their bench, play their deck the way they want to play it, but then let you hit for a huge amount of damage each turn? Their 140 HP helps a lot compared to Jumpluff because it means that most Pokemon will struggle to knock it out in one hit. The only main issue I see with it is its weakness to lightning, which with Zekrom and Thundurus being really popular at the moment will mean that they can one hit KO it pretty easily, and because they've got 110 HP and 130 HP, Empoleon might struggle to knock them out in return. I know a few people have been testing it with Terrakion, which could work, so we'll have to see how popular it turns out, and I'm sure a few people will try it considering it's only Battle Roads. So after this we've got Random Receiver, and this is a card which might replace Pokegear in a lot of decks. The only difference is that Pokegear has a chance of giving you a choice between several supporters or not getting any, where the Random Receiver always guarantees one, but it could be something like a Pokemon Collector which you don't want in the middle of the game. I think I much prefer Random Receiver in decks which play Dual Ball over Pokemon Collector, since you're usually pretty happy to hit into any form of draw supporter. Whether in decks with Pokemon Collector, I'd rather play Pokegear because I like the option during the middle of the game of being able to choose another supporter if Pokegear was one of the top cards on my deck. So after this we've got the first EX Pokemon which I'm going to look at, and this is Tornadus EX. Its attacks are decent, and when you consider it can use things like Eelektrik and double colourless energy to power it up, it means that it's going to get going pretty quickly, and it's a nice addition for Celebi Mewtwo decks which can hit for 100 rather than 80 damage on the first turn. My favourite reason for liking this card is its fighting resistance, which along with an Eviolite is going to buffer 40 from any Groudon EXs or Terrakions. Now if you take into account Lightning decks and Dark decks are both generally weak to fighting, so they're going to have a really tough time if those decks become more popular. Thanks to Tornadus EX buffering 40 damage a time, they're going to have a really hard time knocking it out, and since it's a basic Pokemon it's splashable in pretty much any deck and can really help shore up your matchups against those cards. So after this we've got one of the two main support cards that Dark decks get in the form of trainers, and this is Dark Claw. Now it's a Pokemon tool, so it might clash with Eviolite or EXP Share if you play those in your deck as well. But it's really useful and means that your active Dark Pokemon does 20 extra damage with each attack it uses. Now if you think how popular Plus Power is, and this has that effect of 2 every single turn, I think this is going to see a lot of play, particularly in decks like Zoroark, which might not be able to fill their bench straight away and need the quick damage. There isn't really a huge amount to say on this card because we'll have to see later on what decks are popular and how important that extra 20 damage is. But I suspect that it's going to come in use in a lot of times, and since Junkharm can get it back, it works pretty well with the deck's general engine. So Dark Patch, I think, is a card which will push Dark decks into the top tier. Now the reason for this is that most competitive decks at the moment, aside from Durant, have to have some form of energy acceleration in order to work. Lightning decks have got Eelektrik, decks with Terrakion tend to use EXP Share, and Celebi Mewtwo Tornadus decks use Celebi Prime. This is really good, and for when you discard the Dark Energy, all you have to do is play Dark Patch, and you can attach it back onto one of your bench Dark Pokemon. Now if you consider it can be abused with Junkharm, which can then discard further Dark Energy if you want to use it another time, it's got a lot of synergy and means that Pokemon like Darkrai EX, if you wish to play that, or other bulkier Dark Pokemon, have a better chance of being able to be powered up in time. I'm not sure if Zoroark needs it itself, but I'm sure other Pokemon will, and Darkrai EX packs quite a punch if you have a Dark Claw attached to it as well. So I think over time, if Dark decks have other support cards released with them as well, we could see a kind of mini SP engine. But for now, I think they'll be one of the top decks to look out for at Battle Roads and Nationals because of those two cards. So this is Raikou EX, and since Lightning decks are pretty popular already, it's probably got a place in some of them. Volt Bolt's the main attack we're looking at, and provided you discard all Lightning Energy attached to Raikou EX, it does 100 damage to any of the opponent's Pokemon. Now usually this would be insanely good, but because of Pokemon Catcher being so easy to use, the fact that it can target any of your opponent's Pokemon isn't as good in this current format. However, you can do nice tricks, like for example, Pokemon Catcher one of the opponent's Eelektrik out and then knock out the other one on their bench. So they've lost an Eelektrik, plus they've got one stuck active, and it can give them some problems. I'm not sure if it can afford to discard 3 each turn, even with the Eelektrik, because it's going to be hard to keep cycling those back. So you'll probably want to try and attach a double colourless to it as well, so you don't have to discard 3 Lightning. And you maybe need some way of getting it back to the bench, since the Eelektrik will need to put a lot of those energy back onto it. But it's only got a retreat cost of 1, and you only really need to play 1 copy, so I'm sure it will come in use in a lot of situations and be a pretty playable card. So next, I've put these two cards together because there's an obvious synergy between them, so I'd rather talk about them both at the same time. Now Twist Mountain lets you flip a coin, and if heads you can put Aerodactyl straight onto your bench, provided it's in your hand. So you don't have to have the hassle of trying to evolve it from a fossil, which normally renders cards like this unplayable. Its ability, Ancient Scream, is basically a plus power every turn for whatever Pokemon you have active. So in decks like Empoleon, for example, not only will it take up a bench space, which means you're doing 10 extra damage, its ability means it does a further extra 10 damage. So if you've got a couple of these on your bench, you can sometimes hit the damage you'll need to one-hit KO your opponent's Pokemon if they're restricting what cards are in your field. I'm not sure in general how it'll fit into other decks, and I think plus power is a lot easier the majority of the time. But if having that extra 10 damage is a key part of your deck strategy, then I think it's definitely worth looking at. So next up we have Zoroark, and I think this is one of the main Pokemon we're going to see in Dark decks. It's quick, it hits for a lot of damage, and its predecessor Zora has an attack called Ascension, which for 1 colourless energy allows you to evolve straight into Zoroark, so it's really consistent as well from turn 2. Dark Rush for 2 dark energy does 20 damage times the number of... Brutal Bash does 20 damage times the number of dark Pokemon you have in play. So provided you have your Zoroark active, if you can get 5 dark Pokemon in your bench as well, that's 120 damage. Then if you add on any extra damage from Special Darkness Energy or from Dark Claw, you'll be able to one-hit KO a lot of Pokemon in the format aside from EXs. I think that because of its 100 HP, I think you're going to be in a situation where it's being KO'd virtually every turn. So in order to stay competitive, you need to be able to take cheap prizes early on with Catcher, but still be able to one-hit KO Pokemon later on to keep up that price advantage, because otherwise it'll be falling behind quite quickly. So in this sense it's really useful, and its retreat cost isn't too much of a problem if you want to play a Darkrai EX in it as well, which also gives you another option if you are running out of Zoroark quite quickly. This is a card which I think goes really well with Dark Claw, because I do think that that extra 20 damage is going to be vital in a lot of opportunities. And yeah, I think this is a deck that could challenge Zekrom, Eelektrik and Celebi, Mewtwo, Tornadus for that top spot. This is another EX Pokemon, and you just heard me talk about it. Darkrai EX has an ability called Dark Cloak, and it says each of your Pokemon that has any dark energy attached to it has no retreat cost. So this is really nice, because things like Zoroark has a retreat cost of 2, and you're generally going to be stuck with a lot of bulky Pokemon active which might be captured out, and you're going to have no real way to retreat them, where the Darkrai EX solves that problem. On top of this, Night Spear requires 3 energy for 90, and it does 30 to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon, which is alright, but with Dark Claw and Dark Patch it's pretty easy to power up and hits for a fair amount of damage. I think the free retreat's useful because Dark Patch can only welcome one of your bench Pokemon. It means you can retreat them to the bench, attach energy to them, then maybe switch them back out. And you know, Darkrai EX can just sit on your bench. It doesn't necessarily have to be brought active or have those 2 prize cards risked. The only potential problem is the fact that if you have it on your bench, they could drop a Terrakion after you've knocked out one of their Pokemon. Pokemon Catcher would active, then retaliate for 2 prizes. But it's not essential in some matchups, it's a luxury. So there's no real need for you to play it onto your bench if you suspect that they're playing Terrakion. So this is the last trainer card, and I'm really not sure how much play this is going to see, as opposed to, say, Pokemon Communication or Levelable. It's like Pokemon Communication, but aside from shuffling a Pokemon back into your deck, you just have to discard 2 cards from your hand. Now normally this isn't so bad, because all decks have cards which they don't need towards the middle or late end of a game, or they might have energy which they want to discard so they can get them back with Dark Patch or Eelektrik. My only main issue is that because decks run 3 or 4 Giant Calm already, I'm not sure if they can have any cards left over which they able to discard with Ultra Ball, and you really don't want to be discarding 2 important cards from your hand, plus that swap from the Ultra Ball just to get 1 Pokemon from your deck. I think you can maybe argue playing 1 or 2 copies in a deck and Giant Calming it back if you want to, but I don't really think of it as a kind of 3 or 4 card max out in your deck kind of thing, because I just don't think that in the long run you'll be able to kind of keep your key resources which you need from being discarded. So the last card we're going to look at is the final EX Pokemon, and since fighting decks look like they're going to be pretty good anyway, thanks to being able to hit for the weakness on lightning decks and dark decks, it's worth a mention. It could go in with Terrakion decks to give them another alternative. So it's got resistance to lightning by 20, which is really good. So if you can hit an Eviolite on it, the only real way of going to be knocking it out is something like a Tornadus EX or Mewtwo EX. Trump does 20 damage and does 10 to each of your opponent's bench Pokemon, so you're going to have to use that a few times to soften them up for Giant Claw, which hits for an additional 40 damage if they already have 2 damage counters on them. So if they've got 2 damage counters on them already, then you're hitting them for 120 damage, then that's probably likely going to be a straight knockout. The only small issue is maybe if they're not benching a lot of Pokemon when you're starting to use Trump to spread that damage, or whether you can consistently be able to hit for that 120 damage. But it does offer a really good alternative to Terrakion, will probably stay around for a few more turns, and its weakness to water isn't really a big deal, aside from if Empoleon becomes popular. So there it is, they're my favourite cards from this new set. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'd really appreciate it if you could give it a like or subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see any videos in the future. Let me know what you guys think of the set and what your favourite cards are from it, and I'll see you soon. Bye.